Chris, I rolled a 3.
A 3. Andy, today we'll be talking about what location or time would make a great RPG setting.
Ooh, what a delightfully open-ended question.
Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
I'm Andy Rao.
And friends, this week we have a normal episode for you.
Woohoo!
Yeah, Andy's excited. So this is actually going to be, we were doing the math, this will be our last normal episode of the year. The next two are going to be our holiday special episodes. So if you've been with Roll for Topic for its long storied career, I guess you'll know that around the holidays we like to try to do something special, and that is designing a dungeon on air and then playing through that dungeon in the next episode. So the episode after this one is going to be all about us doing that live design together. We do it collaboratively on air. It usually goes great. We'll see if third time's a charm. And then the episode after that we'll actually be playing through it. And I think that might actually drop on Christmas Day or like just before. So you'll have something to listen to if you're trying to ignore your family, I guess is the upshot there.
Yeah, so you can tell your loved ones that you already are getting the only Christmas present you really want, which is a new episode of Roll for Topic.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Oh, please, I hope that is not the highlight of your Christmas, but we'll take it, I guess. Yeah. So, Andy, I'm actually pretty excited about this topic that we rolled for like a couple of reasons. So this has been on the table for a while now, and we actually ended up rewording it a little bit. So I don't know if you remember this, but at one point this was worded, what historical time setting would you like to set an RPG in? And every time anyone looked at it, they got really nervous about it. And I think it was because they saw historical and they were like, oh no, I have to know my history on this. Yeah. So instead we reworded it to, what location or time would make a great RPG setting. Yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Andy. Like, what's your, number one, this is the perfect time period to set an RPG?
Oh, okay. Well, I wasn't expecting to, be called out right at the beginning of the discussion. Well, so thank you, co-host.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of great settings out there, and as I go through a typical month, probably at least 3 times something jumps out at me as wow, that would be such a cool RPG setting if we could manage it. I know we're not going to limit our discussion here to just kind of historical time periods, but there's some time periods that just seem ripe to be done in an RPG that I haven't seen much of. One is kind of the time of the Fourth Crusade. Oh, I would say just a lot of interesting stuff is going on, and I've long felt that even though there are a couple of RPGs that have gone there, I felt just that the ancient world in general is underused as an RPG setting, and by that I'm talking about ancient Mesopotamian kingdoms. There's a lot of cool history going on, and there's a lot of it's a perfect time period if you kind of want to meld sort of a real history and sort of mythic or mythological ideas.
Yeah, I was going to ask you along those lines. I mean, the location and time, that sort of setting, is the interest for you the actual historical events or the feel or the technology?
Well, that's a good question. So generally speaking, it's the feel that the time period evokes in me that is most exciting. Would it be fun to participate or to role play in a game set around some really specific historical events? Yeah, I'm sure it would be. But mostly it's just the feel, whether it's the Fourth Crusade, whether it's the feel of massive change going on, or whether it's in the ancient world, it's that feel that this is the time of heroes and gods walking the land, before civilization was in its early, taking its first baby steps. So those are some neat feelings, and I'm just kind of babbling here. But before we kind of move on, let me just quick turn that back at you and say, is there a setting, historical or otherwise, that you think would be a cool RPG?
Yeah, the tricky thing about this is if you open it up to time, for me, my mind immediately jumps to far future stuff. Far future or like really far like distant past, I guess I should say. So like, yeah, thinking about like dawn of time sort of like setting.
Yep.
Yeah, like I don't know if that means like we're all playing dinosaurs or what, but like something mythological I think would be kind of interesting to play out, like yeah, telling a creation myth together as an RPG. And then like far future, that's just because I mean, like, I don't know, I grew up playing like sci-fi video games and stuff, so that's always where my brain ends up going. But if we're gonna like ground it in a time period, do you remember, I'm sure it's still going, the webcomic Wondermark at all?
I vaguely.
Yeah. The artist of that, I think David Melky, I think is his name. So he cuts out like old Victorian era advertisements and stuff like that to build the webcomic. So like he'll cut out an advertisement of like, you know, two ladies in a ladies magazine or something, and then have them talk to each other.
Okay.
Like that. Anyway, all I have to say, so he did a talk in Ann Arbor once that I went to, where he talked about like that 18th century had a lot of these like inventor types in it who like super into like racing balloons and doing kind of all that sort of stuff. It's always stuck out to me as that would be a fun time period, I think, to set something in that, like around the world in 80 days style setting. And I'm sure there's a million settings for this, but I think I just like the idea of like having a party full of like balloonists bouncing around from like country to country, you know, having adventures together.
Like steampunk, but a little bit more like whimsical and less like punky, maybe?
Yeah, like almost no punk at all, I think would be, yeah. It's not about the brass and the buttons, it's more about the like the limitless possibilities of helium or something. Yep.
So I hope that as we talk, I want us to drop periodically, if we just think of a cool setting that we think, I want us to drop that into the conversation. So I hope you'll share more. But I do have a question to kind of keep us rolling here. So we have talked at times in past episodes about some settings that don't really work for us versus settings that do. And so I want to revive a discussion we've had in the past, because it's still one I think about regularly. Why is Star Wars such a gameable setting, and why is Dune not a gameable setting?
Yeah.
So what I'm asking here is, what makes for a setting that is exciting to think about role-playing in, and why are there so many cool setting ideas that just don't seem like they would be very fun to play in? So we can talk about Dune and Star Wars, because I think those are big ones, or we can just talk about the question in other terms. Do you have any opening thoughts?
Yeah. Let's slag off Dune for a second. So the new, like, I liked the book back when I read it, and I love the new movie quite a bit. And I've never seen the cool one back in the 80s that everybody says is good, but probably isn't. But
oh no, it's good. No, they all say it's not good, but it's actually secretly good.
Okay, all right. So maybe I'll watch it sometime. But like, so Dune is a very sparse planet. I mean, obviously, right? But like you only have like a handful of characters that are really reduced to like these civilizations. I guess like these civilizations as characters, right? So like, yeah, like the House Atreides is just like very much its own specific thing, right? Like, so you only have what, 5 or 6 of those at play in Dune, something like that. Whereas Star Wars, like, right, like the cantina scene, right, that jumps out to you, and there's what, 50 different sorts of creatures in there.
Yeah.
And like, it's very tantalizing to think about, I think. Like, each of those can have this whole history, like, why are they in this cantina? And then like, what are their societies like and all that. So I think for me, the gameable part about that is more along the lines of like all these like limitless possibilities, whereas Dune feels very constrained.
Yeah. Yeah, I've read through the recently released Dune RPG, which is a really neat RPG, and it did kind of, even after reading it, I was not really sure what I was supposed to do in the Dune setting.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, what can you do on Arrakis that wasn't done already by a much cooler character in the books? There's like a limited number of awesome things to do on Arrakis, and Paul Atreides does them all in the course of the novel Dune. So I decided to read some of the like Dune prequels written by Frank Herbert's son, and they are kind of widely panned, and I'm not going to go to bat for their literary quality, but I will say, reading them, it's something clicked in my mind, and I was like, oh my goodness, I know what to do in the Dune setting. And the answer is, don't go to the planet Dune. Like, tell a Dune-like story, like with new planets and new houses that you've made up in the style that Dune has. Every planet has like, one incredibly overwhelming geographical feature or gimmick to it.
Yeah.
Each house has like one strong, like moral, core that it follows. So the fun of being Dune is like telling your own story in the style of Dune. At least that was what struck me. So actually leaving the source material a little bit, but while being inspired by it.
It's hard to think about Dune and not right. So unless you're going to be Paul running around doing all the cool stuff immediately, like it's really a story about like late stage capitalism and efficient markets and stuff. It's like it's super super boring, right? Like they're going to Arrakis to like mine stuff, right? It's like it's not like if that story went well and there wasn't a big war and all that stuff, it would have been a story about like production and spreadsheets and like yields and things like that, right? So I think like at its heart, it's sort of a boring concept for like a tabletop role-playing game. Like an amazing concept, I think, for like a StarCraft style like RTS RTS game, right? So I think you're absolutely right. Like you have to kind of step out of that.
By the way, that Dune actually started the RTS genre?
Yes. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Sorry, everybody. I tried to avoid video game talk, but
you avoided it. I force suspected.
Walked us right into it. Like, I guess for like Star Wars, though, right? I mean, it sounds like you would have a lot of ideas for games in that universe, right?
Yeah, I would not have any trouble coming up with something to do in Star Wars.
Yeah. Would you have trouble doing that Dune game? Like, right, so like you know that you have the angle on it, but like would the process of sitting down to come up with your own houses and your own, each of their moral codes and that, would that be fun for you?
I think it would. I mean, it would have to be with a group of players that bought into that as well. Mm-hmm. And not with a group of players that were thinking we're going to all be members of House Atreides and we're going to go to Planet Dune and fight Harkonnens. Well, Paul saves the universe, right? I would be up for it with the right group of people for sure. I don't know if it'd be like my first choice of games to run right now, but
yes,
I would have fun with it too. What do you think about this as a defining characteristic of a gameable or interesting setting? That the setting is on the brink of major change. Yeah,
no, I think that's great. I think for me, what is exciting, I'm thinking about like, so like I'd never run a World War II game. Like there's just, it's not interesting to me. Like as a setting, like as a horrifying thing that happened. Yeah. Like it's good to study and all that, but like, it's not as interesting to me. And I think it's because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of individual human stories you can tell about it. If that makes any sense. Like, yes, there are a lot of individual human stories, but also a lot of those stories, like everybody's sort of like wearing the same clothes, if that makes sense. Yeah. It's a lot of like us versus them. There is nuance there, but there's also kind of isn't nuance. Like, so for me, it loses a lot of interest, right away. But I think going back to what you're saying, like on the brink of change. And I think a lot of people and I think if you can define different groups and different people that have different ideas of what that change means and how to get to it.
My teenager, over the years has invested a fair amount of time in kind of creating a fictional world where they write short stories and they do little games and role-playing things with their friends. And a lot of their friends do that too. And one of the things I have taken to asking them when they give me updates about the setting is like, so what's going to break this? Like, you've just described a cool magical kingdom. So what is about to happen that changes everything you just told me or casts it in a new light? Or threat, or what new technology is coming out that's changing it? What new threat is coming out of nowhere that's changing everything? And I mean, I don't know that has to be a question you ask about every setting, but I don't know always that the PCs need to be on the edge of that change exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just something about having that in the background, like kind of being in a liminal state between the world as it used to be and the world as it's about to be. For me, that is just exciting on a general level. And so even if the PCs are just beating up thugs in a warehouse, it makes a difference if they're doing that when magic is dying and Steam technology is rising, versus when they're just doing that and nothing cool is going on in the background.
No, I'm totally with you. I mean, we're far afield from history at this point, but it's yeah, like I think about like book series that I really like. Like, I mean, Harry Potter, which is problematic at the moment for a lot of reasons, but I mean that you get like one book where the world is sort of calm and like a lot of the world building happens, and then from there it's just like it's a slow dismantling of what's like all the stuff that you feel comfortable with and all the stuff that you've grown to like in like one or two books. It's just like, yeah, it's just this unraveling, and then by the end you're not even at Hogwarts anymore, right? It's just like, yeah. But I mean, if you had 20 books that were just like people at Hogwarts, it'd be pretty boring very fast. You know, yeah. I think the same thing with gaming too. Yeah, it's like if things are at a stasis, it's less interesting. I mean, I think like that's where all the conflict happens too, right? Even in games, like you need a king who's gone mad and who's, you know, trying to do, you know, battle someone else or upset some sort of god. You know, like you need conflict to happen, I think, for role-playing games to happen, and like a big technological change or a big some sort of historical change is a great way to introduce that.
Yeah, one of my favorite little setting elements from an RPG is from the 13th Age RPG, which like the opening dozen or so pages introduce you to the gods of the setting. If you know 13th Age, you know I'm eliding over a lot of details here, but but each kind of deity who's responsible for kind of upholding an aspect of creation is described. And then the last thing on the page is there's a section that says, everything will be fine unless, and then it fills in the blank. So whatever, here's the elf, I'm making this up, the elf queen who, you know, rules her forest kingdom. Everything will be fine unless the god of thieves like steals her palantir and casts the forest in, you know, and it's like that for everyone. Everything will be fine unless somebody manages to unite the orc hordes for the first time ever, and and I think that's a fun way to take a setting, even one that's kind of boring, and ask yourself like what could be about to happen here that's going to like shake this up.
Do you like those sorts of things being really obvious, right? Like, I don't know. I'm just thinking about, I'm thinking about Final Fantasy, but let's abstract that a little bit. But
we're all thinking about Final Fantasy all the time.
Okay. Taking Final Fantasy, like a lot of those have like crystals sort of at the core of their stories. And it's usually like the crystal is upholding some sort of energy power, whatever. The crystal breaks or someone steals it, and it, you know, like it's a super obvious inciting event, right? Like you have this physical object that has been stolen or broken in some way, and like that makes magic go wild like that. Do you like that, or do you enjoy it being a little bit more subtle than that, where it's like, I don't know, like a king dies and the heir to the throne is not a very nice person?
I think, generally speaking, I like more subtle stuff. Of course, it depends exactly who you're playing with and what you're trying to do with your session and whether it's a one-shot or a long campaign. But, like, for example, Middle-earth is a setting that, at the time of Lord of the Rings, is on the cusp of great change. Like, I mean, it's interesting that there's a magic MacGuffin out there that will destroy the world, right? But what I find, more compelling about the setting is the stuff that's changing in the background, right? The elves are finally leaving. Magic is going away. The world is finally moving on from its kind of magical, mythical past into this new age of man and technology. And that hangs, in the background throughout the Lord of the Rings without being the most obvious MacGuffin-based, pivot point, I guess. Yeah. So generally speaking, more subtle. If you are talking something like a video game, you probably do need to like, oh no, the Dark Lord stole the medallion of Zork, and now
Oh, geez, I'm in.
yeah, I know, and it's instantly compelling, right? Just like give me my gun and point me in the right direction.
I'm getting that medallion. Yeah. Okay, so I want to shift gears a little bit and like talk about some real world stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess my first question for you is: have you ever set a session in Michigan? We both live in Michigan, listeners. So I'm just curious. Like, have you ever set something in your town or in Michigan?
I have not run a game set in like my real world locale, but I have played in a couple games that did. I played in a game of Hunter, a White Wolf game. Hunter the Vigil, I think, is the more recent of the iterations of Hunter that was explicitly set in Grand Rapids, where I live. And so that's a game about like reclaiming your hometown, like block by block from supernatural threats. So that was pretty fun. The game didn't last very long, so it didn't really realize its potential. But and I've played in at least one like convention game that was like a zombie game set in I forget the town we were in, but whatever town the convention was in. So yeah, what about you? And then also why do you ask? I guess.
Oh yeah. I don't think I've ever played something set in Michigan. I just ask because it's really fascinating to me that there are places that we sort of know instinctively, right? Like you know Grand Rapids, like Michigan, like the fauna, the flora, the layout of stuff, like the coastline, all that sort of stuff. But it's like it's not the first thing that we reach for.
Yeah.
In games, and like I do wonder if it would be a nice shorthand. Like I've thought about doing a game that just uses the map of Michigan as sort of the world map, right? Like because I mean it's an interesting shape, right? Like you have water, like you have obvious spots where towns could be, stuff like there's some nice built-in geography there as well. So I don't know. I'm just curious about that. Like why. Like these are places that we live in, but they're not places that we're reaching for at all as a good place to set a story.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I mean, it might be different if we lived in a place that was, had a deeper history of big historical stuff going on. I mean, cool history stuff happened in Michigan. I'm not bagging on the mitten-shaped state, but But I don't know. Maybe if we lived in Rome or Venice or something like that, it might seem a little less weird to set a game there. But
do Venetian teenagers like hate living there? Yeah, can't wait to get out of this backwater.
When I was younger, I did a reasonable amount of traveling around, and I definitely got the impression that no matter where you are, your teenagers would do anything, hate it, and will do anything to get out. Like, no matter who live in the richest historical, cultural hotspot in all of history, and your teenagers are bored and want to leave. But
yeah, I mean, there's lots of great movies about like movies and TV shows about kids having adventures in their hometown.
Yeah,
too. Yeah, so I'm like, I don't know, like it's making me pause and say, like, would it be fun to set a game in Ann Arbor in the 1950s? Like you could go back, you could find maps of what the city looked like then. So there could be a fun little local history element to it. Which, as I say that sounds like the most boring and nerdy thing to lay on your players.
No, I don't think so. What's funny is for like my Call of Cthulhu games, I did one kind of extended mini campaign set in New York, and I really enjoyed digging into finding maps of 1920s New York, learning about what it was like to live in 1920s New York. That was really interesting. Mm-hmm. I don't know why, but doing that same level of research for Grand Rapids or Ann Arbor or whatever, it doesn't have the thrill of excitement you might expect from the idea of like, hey, I want to explore my hometown from a different historical angle. I don't know why that is exactly, and maybe I just need to get off my high horse and try it.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said about like some other place you can gloss over some details that you might not be able to. Yeah. Because I could see a game set in Ann Arbor. Like if I was playing with Ann Arborites and like we were playing in Ann Arbor, there'd end up being a lot of like talk about you know, like roads and like transit and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you'd get into these like side conversations pretty easily, I think, about like, oh, like, you know, like let's go down to where the Dairy Queen used to be, you know, like those sorts of conversations. Yeah. But I mean, that could also be really fun. It's like, oh wow, like we just stumbled on this vast field, and like, oh, that field, you know, right now, like that's the mall, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, what do you, okay. But anyway, so setting that aside, I'm thinking about like other time periods in American history, that would be gameable or not otherwise. Like I was thinking about like the Revolutionary War as possibly like an interesting time period. I don't know enough about it to really do much on that side.
I have a couple comments about that real quick. First, I wanted to say I actually just picked up a game set in the Revolutionary War, Flames of Freedom.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that I think last time. Yeah,
and we even like kind of like celebrated it last episode because our friend Kyle Latino did some of the maps in it, and that's a game about the Revolutionary War, and it is a little hard to think of events in American history that like took place here in America that jump out as like really exciting RPG settings. You know, there's most historical stuff, like most RPGs I know, I guess Call of Cthulhu set in America in like various time periods, but mostly 1920s New England. But I don't know, you know, most games I can think of where you like play Americans either now or in history, you're like some kind of agent or detective, you know, and not necessarily staying in America, you know, just traveling around America during a certain decade or something like that. So what's interesting to me about like Flames of Freedom in the Revolutionary War is not really the actual like war itself, which I find interesting but doesn't scream like make an RPG out of me to me. But it's the kind of some of the cultural, like, so Flames of Freedom makes the wise choice to bring a sort of Hawthorne-esque, like, dark supernatural presence into the setting. And so Flames of Freedom it takes place like during the Revolutionary War, but you know, your missions are not to like go fight a bunch of redcoats. You know, you're doing something else while in the background, occasionally affecting your life. You know, this bigger conflict plays out. That's my like. I'm not doing justice to Flames of Freedom, which is like a 700-page RPG. So you can go read that yourself. But all that to say, like, interestingly, for like, well, the Revolutionary War, and you could also say like the Civil War or something like that, those things sound interesting, but like, to me, they sound more interesting as like things that are happening in the background and affecting your character's like outlook and perspective, rather than events that I would really want to have a party of PCs like actively participating in.
The part of this question that makes me nervous, and I alluded to at the beginning of this conversation when we're sort of talking about the setup, is like the thought of doing something like historical, like set in a historical setting, is that you have to know a little bit about it, or you have to be very purposeful about saying like, no, we're not going to do that. Which is like, I mean, I guess you could, but I think for some people who maybe know a bit more about history, like that's just like, it's a non-starter. Like, how could you not dive in deep on that?
Would you be happy like running a game set in Rome, for example? Like, so say let's say Rome around the time of Julius Caesar or something like that. Would you be happy running a game like that, like going mostly on the feel you want to evoke, or would you feel obliged to like go to the library and check out some books on Rome and get your Roman street maps correct and your Roman governors and officials and stuff like that correct?
Yeah, I think I would, or I would at least feel sheepish about not doing it. I think I would then be falling back on depictions of that time period in movies and stuff, and I think it'd be very easy for me to just go towards like what Monty Python did or Mel Brooks did, the kind of the jokey versions of it instead, and then it kind of falls apart a bit for me. What about like you? Would you
that's
maps?
You know, there are a number of, I really love World War II and a couple of other settings, Rome. But outside, there's time periods I would love to play in that I haven't, specifically because I just don't feel like I could get a good enough handle on the history. So I really like Japanese history. I would love to run like a historical samurai game. It's on my to-do list before I die. And the only reason I haven't is because I get intimidated every time I start thinking seriously about doing it, because if I want to run a real historical game, that means putting in the work to like get it right. And the thing about historical RPGs, and this is a little bit of a side tangent or rant, but a lot of games are not really good at telling you what you actually need to know to play plausibly in a historical setting. Okay. So there's a lot of great historical RPGs, but I want to pick like World War II as an example. You pick up one of the many like perfectly good RPGs about World War II out there, and what will you find? You will find like timelines of major events of the war, and you will find like breakdowns of the technology and weaponry and stuff like that on each side. What you won't find are things like, what was it like to live in this culture? Like, what songs were popular on the radio? How hard was it to get food? What kind of food did you do? Were there restaurants you could go to? What kind of car did you probably have? Were there phones? If you wanted to travel across the country, how would you do it? And could you? Like real practical questions. And some games like Call of Cthulhu have been around long enough that they have had the opportunity to go into that kind of depth, so that like there's some good games. The Call of Cthulhu rulebooks have gotten pretty good about this, and there's some good supplements that really go into like, what's it like to live in this time period? That helps you play a character who really truly feels like they belong there. But an awful lot, like, with my samurai games, I have a couple of games built around playing in a feudal Japanese setting. And yeah, I don't need to know about like the different wars, really. I need to know what did you eat, and like where did you get your food, and these sorts of details that make the setting come to life. At least that's a little side rant on my part, but
no, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I mean, I was even like, as soon as you brought up doing something in feudal Japan, just thinking about like I would have no idea how to role play that without falling back on stereotypes again from media and stuff. Would just be like, I don't know, like what
well,
what would I wear, like what would I do?
Yeah, I mean, in all these books, they'll have like a big section about like the code of Bushido and the the famous stuff you kind of already know. They'll go into sometimes good detail about it, but then you don't have any sense of like, so if I meet someone, if I cross paths with someone on the road, like what does that look like? What does that interaction look like? Anyway, that's just kind of a side rant, and I wanted, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, or kind of throw one more thing in your direction, if you don't mind. And that is, one thing I think makes a good setting is, does this setting support the idea of like a kind of roving band of adventurers? Whatever roving band of adventurers looks like, does the setting play well to that concept, to the setup that RPGs have, that you're with a group of kind of problem solvers or trouble seekers or agents or investigators or whatever. And I'm not talking here about kind of the specialized games that don't follow that setup. But most games, you're in a party with other PCs, and you need to be doing something or solving something. And obviously people like that exist in every time period, but I do think that some time periods make for much more clear like on-ramps into that familiar RPG experience than others do. A number of science fiction settings that are fantastic settings. I'm thinking of the Transhuman Space setting by Steve Jackson Games, and to some extent the Eclipse Phase setting. These deep, well thought out, interesting, huge and vast science fiction things that don't have enough of a hook of like why are you in a band of like roaming adventurers, and what sort of thing are you doing, right? If like there's a lot of settings I think where there's so many options that I kind of wish that they would restrict the options a little bit more than they do. Yeah. And I don't know, I think some settings just lend themselves a little bit better to that. Now, I've just ranted for several long minutes there. Go ahead and respond.
No, that's all really good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, just as you're talking, I'm thinking about how you'd fit that in. I think for me, the thought that keeps on popping up is like your adventuring party is always going to be on the outside of what's really going on. Like it's not fun if you're in a science fiction setting to play a bunch of like, you know, corporate drones who are working for Megacorp to you know, generate money. Like it's the fun part is playing the hackers, right? Or it's like playing the criminals. You know, it's playing the smugglers. You know, those sorts of things that are on the periphery. Like whether or not they are illegal or not, I mean, I think is a separate conversation that you can have. Like, you know, if that's good or not at your table. But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about like one shot that I ran a while ago that I'm sure I've talked about a bunch on the show. The party were a bunch of like traveling musicians that were traveling, like they were traveling entertainers, right? Like, and that is something that it's built in. They're gonna go around, like they're probably gonna be a little bit scrappy because they have to, you know, travel from town to town and set up shop and like you put on performance and collect money and then figure out a way to get to the next town, you know, that sort of stuff. Like like those slightly more human and grounded elements in a setting are really, to me, like where all the interesting stuff happens. It's not sitting around a conference room table in the king's court necessarily. It's like, yeah, it's the stealing the bread off the table. Yeah. You know, because like you need to find a way to eat. So.
Well, awesome. I think we should wrap up. We've been going for a while here, and so do you have any closing thoughts on that? Why don't we? Tell you what, I'm going to be more specific. Why don't we close by you naming one more setting, historical or from a work of fiction, or just an idea that you have that you would enjoy playing in or running a game
in. The thing that just came to mind, and this is probably not what I want to do, but it just came to mind. Do you remember Gem and the Holograms?
Yes, I do.
Like
yeah.
That I was just thinking about like a early 2000s girl band. Like I think would be a really fun setting to play in.
That actually sounds fantastic. Like so, What are the odds you would ever like put that together as a one shot?
Probably pretty low, although now that I'm thinking about it, like Josie and the Pussycats is an awesome movie, and like there's all sorts of stuff. I think I'm just like I've been on a kick listening to like everybody else in the universe, listening to Taylor Swift's re-releases that she's been doing. Okay, and also Adele dropped an album recently too, and I'm just thinking about like Adele and Taylor Swift teaming up to do something. I don't know, it just would be like something about like that like. Pop star turned double agent just sounds super fun right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay. What about you?
Oh yeah. Oh, I don't know. There's almost too many to mention. A setting I want to figure out how to do it right, and I really want. And so if you know how to do this right, please tell me. Is John le Carré style spies? So not James Bond and. Who are the other guys? Jason Bourne and Mission Impossible stuff. But how do you capture like that setting is just dripping with atmosphere and dread and doom and tension, and how do you get that without the like car chases through Prague or whatever?
That'd be so fun.
So if you know how to do that, I don't know if that's a good gameable setting or not. Like obviously the James Bond version of that is a very great and easy gameable setting, and that's why every spy RPG that I'm aware of is a James Bond RPG. But anyway,
there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. Just like people double and triple crossing each other at every possible moment, every conversation being like 5 conversations at the same time.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
All right, so please write in and tell me what game I haven't seen that does that perfectly. But yes, otherwise that's going to continue to be my white whale as far as RPG settings. But,
you're gonna have to that'll be your retirement project, is just finishing that.
There you go. That's perfect. Okay, well, hey, let's wrap up. It's been good chatting, Chris. Just as a reminder, the next 2 episodes are going to be our special holiday episodes, and I do encourage you to tune in, especially if you're tired of hearing me and Chris drone on about topics like this. You can hear us drone on as we create and then run an adventure. So
yeah, I think and just real quick on that, because I know a lot of people will be traveling when those things come out. So, like, just as a note, we always try to be family friendly with Roll for Topics. So if you're like, oh my goodness, I have a 4-hour drive, what are we going to listen to as a family? If you can convince them that this is a fun thing to listen to, it will be at least family friendly. We can promise you that. So,
yeah, that's a good point. That is it's a side issue, but more game podcasts should
stop having so many swears.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, well, all right, go ahead and why don't you do our sign-off here, Chris?
Yeah, well, I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rowe.
And remember, if your players having fun, you're a great GM.